evening. I'm Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, January 28th. A federal inquiry into foreign interference says there is no evidence of traitors in Parliament conspiring with foreign states, dismissing suggestions to the contrary that alarm the public. In her final report released today, Inquiry Commissioner Mary Joseph Oog concludes that while the threat of foreign meddling is real, Canada's democratic institutions have held up well against it. Ms. Oog says she sees no indication the overall results of recent federal elections were altered by a foreign actor. According to reporting from the Globe and Mail, Ottawa is planning a multi-billion-dollar pandemic-style bailout for workers and businesses if U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on his threat to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian goods as early as February 1st. The bulk of potential spending on new programs to help laid-off workers and businesses affected by tariffs will require legislative approval, which can't take place until Parliament resumes sitting on March 24th. Conservative strategist Anthony Kosh joined us to explain some of the consequences of pandemic-style supports.
So here's the point. I always go back to 2015, back in those fateful debates when Justin Trudeau broke with the orthodoxy of the time to say we were going to run deficits because our debt to GDP ratio was, quote unquote, the best in the G7, and it was cheap to borrow. So we need to invest in Canadians, right? And interest rates were actually very low at this time. But here's the thing, right? It's called the rainy day fund for a reason. And this is the point that conservatives have always stressed. Even in the best of times, it is important for governments to maintain fiscal prudence. Why? Because by very definition, you don't know when a crisis or a series of crises is going to come your way. Obviously, no one could have foreseen what came with COVID-19. Now, at the end of the day, we know that the Liberal government, a lot of the spending that they did have during that time period was completely irrelevant to the pandemic. But I'm saying now you find yourselves here. Nobody could have predicted per se that Donald Trump was going to get reelected. And even if he did get reelected, that he was going to start his mandate with these massive tariff threats towards Canada and the northern border. But now we find ourselves here. We've blown the bank over the course of the last decade. And now we're going to be forced to do so again. So like we said, right, tariffs on their own are inflationary. If we implement a 25 or a retaliatory tariff of any variety on American goods coming into Canada, that means Canadians are going to see that when they go grocery shopping or when they go to buy the products that we've all, become accustomed to buying at specific price points. But then you're going to add on top of that fire these support programs that are now being hinted at coming out of Ottawa, which is going to bring us right back to where we were during the pandemic with out of control inflation. And unfortunately, the Bank of Canada is going to have to respond in some capacity. And Canadians are already bleeding, right? We've got a bunch of mortgage renegotiations and debt renegotiations coming up. People took out those lines of credit and mortgages and all sorts of things at a much lower interest rate than what's currently being offered by financial institutions. And this sort of measure is just going to force the interest rate to go up even more. So it should be a lesson for everybody. You don't know when these crises are coming, but you can always reasonably assume that a crisis will eventually come. So you have to be prudent, not just when times are bad, but also when times are good.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has met with his Polish counterpart, Donald Tusk, in Warsaw today to sign the Canada-Poland Nuclear Energy Cooperation Agreement. Once the deal takes effect, it will allow Canadian companies to support Polish efforts to begin generating nuclear power. Poland expects to begin construction of its first nuclear reactors next year, with the plant producing power by 2033. The Prime Minister spoke on the importance of the agreement and being a reliable partner for energy production.
We know that the requirements, as Donald said, of AI, of data centers, of our technological innovations in our economies over the coming decades is going to require more power, more energy. Canada is there to be a secure, reliable partner to Poland and to all our other friends. As a source of uranium, as a source of nuclear technology, as partnerships on the science and research to make sure that we can power the future in ways that support future generations not put them at risk.
Stay tuned. Up next, Pierre Poilievre claims that temporary visa holders who commit crimes should immediately be deported, and a Liberal in the leadership race makes a similar claim. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Yesterday, while speaking at the Holocaust Memorial Service in Ottawa, Pierre Poilievre declared that temporary visa holders who commit crimes in Canada should be immediately deported.
We must deport from our country any temporary resident that is here on a permit or a visa that is carrying out violence or hate crimes on our soil.
With immigration as a top issue in both Canada and the U.S., and with deportations being ordered by President Trump, some have drawn a comparison between Pierre Poilievre and Mr. Trump. But it isn't just the Conservatives talking about immigration in Canada. Late on Monday, Liberal leadership candidate Ruby Dalla announced that if she were to win the race for party leader and become prime minister, she would deport every illegal immigrant in the country.
There are over 500,000 illegal immigrants in Canada. This is unacceptable. As the daughter of immigrant parents, I know firsthand that immigrants have helped build our great country. But we must clamp down on human trafficking and those that are here illegally. As your Prime Minister, I promise you, I will deport every illegal immigrant in Canada. Canada's comeback starts now.
Canada Post and the reps from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers went head-to-head on Monday at a federal inquiry into the month-long strike at the end of last year. Canada Post CEO emphasized to the Industrial Inquiry Commission that the Postal Service is challenging financial reality and how losses are expected to increase. Ottawa recently announced it will provide a $1 billion repayable loan to Canada Post to keep it operating. Public Safety Minister David McGuinty says that Canada is pushing on multiple fronts to address U.S. concerns about the border.
So we're making huge progress. This plan is a plan which is, of course, international between Canada and the United States, but it's also a plan between different orders of government in this country. We've reached out to and engaged every single province in the country. They are engaged in the case of Alberta, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Quebec. They're making, for example, some of their police authorities available. Police of local jurisdiction are helping us on the border. This is a very, very good thing, and they should be commended for doing so, because it really is a Team Canada response. We're working, for example, on the question of fentanyl. It's important for Canadians to remember, less than 1% of all fentanyl entering the United States is coming from Canada. Less than 1% of illegal immigration into the United States is coming from Canada. So we are tightening up even further our border to deal with some of these challenges. And as I say, it's a federal-provincial relationship and partnership. It's an interagency partnership. It's a bilateral partnership. And we've seen huge progress in the last 3 to 4 months.
His comments come as Manitoba joined Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta in announcing plans to provide policing services to supplement resources at the border to help strengthen border security. Ottawa promised a $1.3 billion border plan in response to Donald Trump's threat of 25% across-the-board tariffs on Canada and Mexico. The Canadian National Railway Company says it has reached a tentative agreement with the union representing 750 signals and communication employees across Canada. The railway had faced a potential strike today by workers represented by the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers. Details of the tentative 4-year agreement were not immediately available. Workers had voted 95% in favor of a strike if a deal could not be reached. The Royal Canadian Navy has identified the sailor who died on Friday in Halifax as Petty Officer 2nd Class Gregory Applin.
The deceased member, his name is Petty Officer 2nd Class Gregory Applin. He was a crew member of HMCS Montreal, including last year's deployment to the Indo-Pacific, which returned in October of last year. He was a weapons engineering technician.
The 38-year-old weapons engineering technician died after a small boat capsized in the north end of Halifax Harbor. The commander of Canadian Fleet Atlantic says an investigation by the military will determine what happened. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed a flurry of executive orders focused on the military. One directs new Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to revise the Pentagon's policy on transgender troops, likely setting in motion a future ban on their military service. Other orders that came on Mr. Hegseth's first day on the job Monday would roll back diversity programs, reinstate troops booted for refusing COVID-19 vaccines, and create a space-based missile defense system. All right, when we return from the break, we'll be speaking to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation about the CRA auto-filing taxes on behalf of Canadians. After that, Doug Ford has requested the dissolution of the provincial parliament. These stories and more right after the break. In the next few weeks, Canadians will start to get their T4s from their employers, which means that tax time is just around the corner. One policy debate that is brewing in Ottawa is whether or not the CRA should auto-file on behalf of taxpayers. Those who support the change argue that this would simplify paying taxes for millions of Canadians and potentially ease the stress around tax time. However, not everyone is convinced that auto-file is the best path forward, including our next guest, Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now, I want to start with the UK because I know they have a similar program to autofiles, and they actually autofile taxes for citizens. I'm curious, is that program not working out, and is that why Canadians have a little bit of hesitation around going through with this?
Well, what the UK example proves is that automatic tax filing doesn't remove the headache of tax season. It just delays it. Okay. Taxpayers are still going to have to double check the CRA's homework to make sure we're not getting overbilled, overtaxed. The Montreal Economic Institute, a Canadian think tank, has looked into this. And in 1 year alone, there were 6 million taxpayers receiving incorrect returns from Britain's tax agency. 3/4 of those returns were overbilling taxpayers. So you give the CRA more power to file your taxes, expect your tax bill to go up.
Now, you've expressed that there are concerns over mistakes made by the CRA. Now, in an autofile situation, what happens if the CRA actually does make a mistake on your taxes?
Well, good luck getting the CRA on the phone when they inevitably mess up and overtax you, right? I mean, just look at the CRA's history of incompetence. Well, the taxpayers' ombudsperson said that the office was flooded with complaints over the CRA. Or, even relatively recent, you had the CRA handing out COVID subsidies to hundreds of dead people, people who are in jail, people not living in Canada, or people who are still children. Or look at the broader government incompetence here, where the government can't even pay its own employees properly without costing taxpayers billions of dollars more. And the government can't even launch a simple app like ArriveCan without soaking taxpayers for about 60 million bucks.
And would you say that there are privacy concerns with the CRA auto-filing taxes?
Yeah, I think that could be a concern if you're giving the CRA more power over Canadians. But, I think one of the biggest concerns here is a conflict of interest issue of having the CRA act as both tax collector and tax filer, right? You, Canadians, want to keep as much of your own money as you can. The CRA wants to squeeze as much money from you as it can, right? So, not to mention, the government is broke. It's more than $1 trillion in debt. So at the end of the day, you got to remember your accountant or your lawyer works for you. These broke government bureaucrats do not.
And is there a way to kind of mediate or prevent those things from happening? So finding, I guess, a middle person or a better process for the CRA to be able to auto-file those taxes, but also not steal money from you?
Well, the CRA shouldn't be auto-filing, right? We should not have this conflict of interest, right? So look at this, right? Not only should you expect your tax bill to go up, but think about what happens when you give the CRA more power. Well, that also means that taxpayers now have to pay for more bureaucrats at the CRA, which is already bloated, right? The CRA has about 60,000 employees. To put that into context, the IRS in the United States has about 80,000 employees. Okay. So in Canada, there's one tax bureaucrat for every 700 citizens, while in the US, there's one tax bureaucrat for every 4,000 citizens.
Now, I guess a big question here is, and you've kind of made it a bit clear that you're a little shaky on trusting the CRA to get the taxes right. Now, was there a good reason to doubt the CRA?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just look at the history of incompetence at the CRA, the taxpayers' ombudsperson saying that they're flooded with complaints about the CRA. And look, when the CRA inevitably messes up your tax return and you should expect to be paying higher taxes because of this, good luck getting the CRA on the phone. You know, like trusting the CRA to do your tax return is like trusting your dog to protect your burger. Well, the burger is gone, and so is your wallet.
Now, we do just have about 30 seconds here, but is there a viable solution? What can be done to make tax time a little less stressful for Canadians?
Yeah, there's two things. First, I just want to say, look, hiring more bureaucrats isn't going to make life better for taxpayers. If the government really wants to help, the two things that they can do is number one, stop taking so much money from Canadians in the first place, cut out the middleman, cut taxes. And step number two is just simplify the tax code.
Franco, thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. Premier Doug Ford has requested the dissolution of provincial parliament this afternoon, triggering an election for the end of February. Mr. Ford has justified calling an early election by saying he needs a mandate to outlast U.S. President Donald Trump's administration.
Right now, President Trump has put uncertainty to every single Canadian, a lot of other countries around the world. And this isn't going to happen overnight. May not happen February 1st. I'm sure something's coming, but this is going to be a battle for the next 4 years. And I want to make sure that I have a strong mandate to outlast President Trump.
But opposition leaders say that calling an election more than a year early is a waste of time and money. Ontario Health Minister Sylvia Jones says the province is spending $1.4 billion in new money to ramp up primary health care.
Under the leadership of Premier Ford, our government has been making record investments in healthcare, taking bold action, and making innovative changes to connect people to the care they need when and where they need it. We are expanding capacity, reducing wait times and wait lists by improving access to key services, such as primary care, diagnostic imaging, home care and hospital care in communities across Ontario, and taking action to maintain and expand Ontario's healthcare workforce.
The goal is to connect every Ontarian with primary care by 2029. Monday's announcement came 2 days ahead of the date that Premier Doug Ford is set to call a snap election. And although the election doesn't officially start until tomorrow, the opposition NDP are proposing to scrap tolls on Highway 407.
Doug Ford talks a big game about fixing congestion.
Congestion.
But the fact is, for 7 years, he hasn't done anything about it. And that's not the only thing. Every single time I've pushed to remove tolls on the 407, he said no.
The Ford government was asked to support the measure, but used its majority to shut down the idea.
I'm Mara Stiles, leader of the Ontario NDP, and I will remove all tolls off the 407 permanently. That's change.
A frenzy over an AI chatbot made by a Chinese tech startup upended stock markets on Monday and is fueling debates over the economic and geopolitical competition in developing AI. ChatGPT competitor DeepSeek's AI assistant is the #1 downloaded free app on Apple's iPhone store. DeepSeek began attracting more attention last month when it released a new model that boasted it was on par with similar U.S. models like ChatGPT maker OpenAI. But the CEO of Scale AI is accusing DeepSeek of using prohibited chips from the U.S. company NVIDIA.
You know, the Chinese labs, they have more H100s than people think. You know, these are the highest powered NVIDIA chips that they were not supposed to have. Yes. My understanding is that DeepSeek has about 50,000 H100s, which they can't talk about, obviously, because it is against the export controls that the United States has put in place. And I think it is true that, you know, I think they have more chips than other people expect, but also on a go-forward basis, they are going to be limited by the chip controls and the export controls that we have in place.
And on the issue of chips, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened Taiwan with tariffs on chips and semiconductors.
particular, in the very near future, we're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way. And we want them to come back. And we don't want to give them billions of dollars like this ridiculous program that Biden has. Give everybody billions of dollars. They already have billions of dollars. They've got nothing but money, Joe. They didn't need money. They needed an incentive. And the incentive is going to be they're not going to want to pay a 25, 50, or even 100% tax. They're going to build their factory with their own money. We don't have to give them money. They're going to come in because it's good for them to come in. They're giving them money. They don't even know what they're going to do with it. I had people tell me, we have no idea. We didn't need money. They don't know if they're probably going to use the money to build in other places, other countries. It's a ridiculous plan, very expensive and ridiculous. The only way you'll get out of this is to build your plant. If you want to stop paying the taxes or the tariffs, you have to build your plant right here in America. That's what's going to happen at record levels.
The move is widely seen as a radical shift in U.S. policy, given that the U.S. historically has a strong trading relationship with Taiwan, and across several administrations said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan if the Chinese military attempted to invade. I'm Teresa Skupik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. Good night, Canada.